Hello guys, welcome to my video. My name is Maria Jose Pizarro and in this video I'm going to be explaining about chapter number 3 based on the book Principles of Language Learning and Teaching by Douglas Brown. This chapter is about age and acquisition, so let's start. First, let's start reading the objective, which it says, by the end of this chapter, students will understand the connection between age and acquisition process based on the first and second language learning, okay? That's the object. Now, let's introduce this beautiful topic. Well, guys, as you may know, it is normal for each child as he or she grows to develop language skills. One of the most obvious reasons for this theory could be that parents are teaching them different words throughout their development. Also, children begin to perceive different sounds, which prompts them to want to imitate everything they hear. Later, when the child becomes an adult, he begins to expand his language. Therefore, he begins to acquire more vocabulary, new languages, and new forms of expression. Well, age and acquisition are two elements that complement and in turn are contrasted in a perfect way. This gives us to understand that each one needs the other to be able to function, but at the same time that cannot be compared because contextually they are totally different. Specifically speaking of learning, several specialists have come to the conclusion that reasoning can only be acquired over the time, that is by training the person to develop from childhood to adulthood. Let's talk about the comparison and contrast of this topic. Well, guys, it is very easy to compare first and second language acquisition because it is the same as comparing a child and an adult. It is a complement, but need the other to develop. Also, in order to acquire a second language, you first need to have a foundation, and that foundation is your first language, the one you heard for the first time since you were born. On the other hand, although there is a comparison between the first and the second language, there is also a contrast because we cannot compare the language of a child with the language of an adult. It is impossible. A child doesn't have the ability to understand something that an adult is. There is a limitation for him. The same happens with language. You cannot articulate a sentence of or a word without first learning to do so. Okay? Now let's talk about the critical period hypothesis. This hypothesis reveals that there is a stage in language learning where the child has difficulty understanding advanced language. At the beginning of language development, it's very common for children to be able to understand new words and their meaning. But with passing the time, depending on the education and abilities of the person, it can be very difficult to learn something that requires understanding. This is why the CPH was created, since some researchers detected some failures in the learning of the first language. Thus, it can be said that the critical period is when the person reaches his limit of understanding. His head fails to retain all the information and therefore cannot carry out the action. That's the meaning of this hypothesis, basically. Well, guys, now to examine a little bit about these comprehension problems, we first need to talk about the neurological and phonological situation. We must also consider the relevance of cognitive, affective, and linguistic relationship, but for now, we are going to talk about the neurological and phonological system, okay? Well, here in the first picture, we have the neurological system that without any doubt contributes a lot to the investigation of the process of acquisition and learning, since the mind is the center of operation of every human being. It is in the mind where any action is initiated. Therefore, if your mind is not shaped and stimulated from a young age, in the future it will be difficult to understand a second language, or in the worst case, you will not be able to learn even the first language. Every part of the brain must function correctly to be able to work. Okay? Now let's talk about the phonological system. Phonology concerns a study of a system of language in general. This system, like the neurological one, contributes a lot to the research of age and acquisition, because clearly the development of a language needs the articulation of the tongue and all its components. Well, thanks to all the muscles of our mouth, people can make different sounds that and also we can create words and also accents. The different tools that we have allow us to articulate many sounds. That's why the human language is very varied. In the world, there are many accents that are inculcated since you are a baby, that trains the child's mind to prepare it so that as it grows, it can articulate its language gradually, first listening and then repeating, until the mind is able to understand and move to the next level. That is a little bit about these two systems. Now, let's move to this another research. Well, Wash and Diller concluded that different aspects of a second language are learned optimally at different age. They came to the conclusion that the pronunciation process for some students is very difficult and they can carry it out. Also, they noticed that some minds find it difficult to make semantic relationships, which is a process a little more advanced to pronunciation. That led us to the conclusion that learning is a system that requires time also, that is part of an evolution and must follow certain methods to stimulate the brain and to be able to find the best method of learning for each individual. Okay? Let's continue with the cognitive, affective, and linguistic considerations. Well, first, let's talk about the cognitive system. The cognitive part of the brain is another important key for this research, because the perception of words plays an important role in the learning of a language. Every person is able to perceive the difference. It is some that have different abilities, different interpretations, and other methods of learning than ours. Then the affective part means a lot too in the development of language. It is normal for an individual to represent different feelings throughout his life. For example, a child tends to be a little bit selfish, which make him to focus on himself and not catch what happens around him. Also, while a teenager goes through many feelings in periods as is self-criticism, low self-esteem, insecurity, and lack of identity. All those emotions directly or indirectly affect the development of language because without realizing it, this this limits our brain and doesn't allow it to expand. That is, emotions make the brain only focus on that emotion, and that develop to losing the habit of training, learning new things, and putting them into practice. The last concept of this research is very important as the cognitive and affective part, and it is called the linguistic part. Linguistic is a clear evidence that age and acquisition are a component of each other and that you need the first language to develop a second because as we talked about earlier, you cannot learn anything without having a basis and a method that will help you to raise your level of understanding and so continue to achieve a higher challenge as learning a new language. Well, guys, in conclusion, age and acquisition are two elements that influence the learning process of the first and second language. The concept of both is the same. It is that each one complements and helps the other to evolve and learn. Times refers to experience. Over the time, much knowledge is acquired. As life progresses, new things are discovered, new vocabulary, and new information. This is why the acquisition of a language is based on time. To acquire knowledge, you need to follow a method of evolution because that is how our brain works. Well, guys, this is all the information that I have for you. Thank you for your attention and see you in the next video. Bye.